courtroom was quiet, unnervingly so, as Emily and Jason sat on opposite ends of the long wooden bench. The finality of the moment hung between them like fog, thick, unspoken, inescapable. Neither looked at the other. The judge's words were procedural, almost detached. The dissolution of a 10-year marriage boiled down to signatures and legal terms. Just like that, it was over. To outsiders, their marriage had looked intact. No shouting matches, no public betrayals, no messy scandal. But the erosion had been slow and silent, like water against stone. Jason had always been consumed by work, his ambition a double-edged sword. What began as determination turned into distance. Long hours became late nights. Conversations turned into logistics. He was present physically, but absent in every other way. Emily, once patient, began to feel like a shadow in her own life, moving through rooms where love used to live. She had stayed longer than she should have, hoping for change that never came. There were moments when she almost said the words, "I'm lonely. I'm tired. I need you." But they always died in her throat. Over time, she stopped trying. By the end, she didn't cry. She just packed her things with quiet resolve, like someone who'd already grieved the loss long before it was official. Jason, on the other hand, didn't protest. He told himself it was mutual, told his friends they'd simply grown apart. But if he had listened closely, really listened, he might have heard the sound of something precious slipping away. When they stepped out of the courthouse, the sun was just beginning to set. Emily held her coat tighter around her, not from the cold, but from the ache of finality. Jason offered a polite, almost hesitant nod before walking in the opposite direction. No hug, no words, just silence again. Back in her car, Emily exhaled for what felt like the first time in years. It wasn't relief exactly. It was something quieter, something like freedom. Emily arrived in San Francisco with 2 suitcases, a worn-out station wagon, and her daughter Lily asleep in the back seat. The city felt different, bigger, louder, unfamiliar. But it also pulsed with something she hadn't felt in a long time. Possibility. She had no grand plan, just a modest apartment rental, a teaching assistant position at a local elementary school, and the fragile hope that starting over might actually be within reach. The apartment was small, 2 bedrooms, thin walls, creaky floorboards, but it had light. Large windows overlooked the neighborhood park, and on the first morning, Emily stood barefoot in the kitchen watching Lily chase pigeons in the grass below. It was a beginning, and for now that was enough. Life moved slowly at first. She woke early to make breakfast, walked Lily to school, then headed to work where she graded papers and learned the names of children who reminded her that the world could still be innocent. Evenings were quiet, dinner at the small table, bedtime stories, the occasional glass of wine alone by the window. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't easy, but it was hers. She met Adam in the school parking lot. At first, she thought he was another parent. He was tall, unassuming, wore jeans and a dark jacket, but he turned out to be a board member overseeing a technology literacy program. Their first conversation was brief, friendly. He noticed her picking up stray library books that had been left out in the rain. The next day, he brought a stack of replacements, personally delivered. Adam wasn't loud or flashy. He didn't try too hard. He asked thoughtful questions and listened without looking at his phone. When he laughed, it was warm and easy. And when he looked at her, it was like he actually saw her. Not the tired mother or the recent divorcee, but the person underneath. They started getting coffee after work, sometimes with Lily, sometimes without. It was slow, cautious, unspoken. Emily didn't rush it. She wasn't looking to be saved. She was trying to remember who she was before everything fell apart. One evening, while they sat at a bench near the marina, Adam asked her what she wanted. truly wanted from her life now? She paused for a long time, surprised by the question. Then she answered quietly, peace, maybe love someday, but peace first. He nodded like he understood that better than most. And that was when something began to shift. It wasn't a whirlwind. It wasn't dramatic. It was slow, steady, real. Emily was healing, and for the first time in years, she didn't feel like she had to do it alone. Back in Chicago, Jason's apartment looked much the same as it had when Emily left. Sleek furniture, neutral tones, perfectly organized shelves. But now it felt colder, emptier. The silence, once a comfort after long days at the office, now pressed in on him like a weight he couldn't shake. He told himself he was fine. He threw himself deeper into work, early mornings, late meetings, travel when possible. But somewhere between the endless conference calls and the dinners eaten alone, something began to unsettle him. At first, it was small. The moment he reached for a second coffee and remembered how Emily used to add cinnamon to his first, or when he passed by a children's bookstore and thought of Lily's laugh echoing through the aisles. Nights were the hardest. He would lie in bed staring at the ceiling, scrolling through his phone with no real purpose. Eventually, curiosity, or something more difficult to name, led him to Emily's social media. Her profile was simple, private, but there were photos. One of Lily at the beach, grinning wildly. Another of Emily holding a mug, hair tousled, wrapped in a blanket he didn't recognize. In one picture, there was a man beside her, slightly turned, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. Jason zoomed in instinctively, his breath catching. The man's expression was calm, grounded, and somehow right. Jason stared at the photo longer than he meant to. He told himself it didn't matter, but he saved it, just in case. As the days passed, he found himself thinking about her more often. He began asking mutual friends how she was doing, though he always played it off casually. He heard she had taken a job at a school, that Lily had settled in quickly, that Emily seemed happy. That last part stuck with him. She hadn't looked happy in years, not with him. One night after a particularly long meeting, Jason poured himself a drink and sat by the window. Rain tapped against the glass. He looked around the apartment and realized for the first time how quiet it had really become. He thought of all the times Emily had asked him to be present, not physically, but emotionally, and all the times he had nodded without listening. He remembered the night she told him she felt like she was disappearing. He hadn't responded then, just turned back to his laptop and said something about a deadline. He thought she was being dramatic. Now that silence echoed louder than anything else. Jason opened his phone again, thumb hovering over her name in his contacts. He didn't press it. He just stared at the screen, wondering when he had started to miss her. Not out of habit, but out of something that felt a lot like remorse. He hadn't realized how far gone she was until he saw her smile again, in someone else's presence. And that realization didn't just hurt, it haunted him. The email came unexpectedly, short, polite, and unmistakably Jason. He wrote that he'd be in San Francisco for a few days on business and asked if they could meet for dinner. To catch up, he said, and maybe see Lily if that's okay. Emily stared at the message for a long time before replying. She kept her answer equally neutral. Dinner's fine, she wrote. Just dinner. When the evening came, Emily chose a small restaurant near the harbor. It was quiet, unassuming, somewhere she and Adam often went after long days. She didn't mention the meeting to Adam at first, but as she was leaving the apartment, keys in hand, she paused at the door. Jason wants to talk, she said quietly. Would you come? Adam didn't hesitate. If you want me there, he replied, and absolutely. Jason arrived first, waiting at the table with a glass of wine already half finished. He stood when Emily walked in, the polite reflex of a man still clinging to formalities. But then he saw Adam behind her, and something in his face faltered. Barely visible, but unmistakable to her. Adam greeted him calmly, his presence effortless. Jason reached for the charm he used to carry so easily, but it didn't land. The small talk was stilted. He asked about Lily, and Emily smiled gently. Speaking of school, piano lessons, her new obsession with drawing foxes, Adam added details in a warm, familiar tone, things only someone present in daily life would know. Jason watched their dynamic unfold and the air seemed to shift. There was ease between them, the kind that comes not from passion or performance, but from trust. They finished each other's stories, laughed at private jokes, paused to listen when the other spoke. Emily was different, lighter. Her voice was freer, her eyes softer, but not for him. The meal passed slowly, though the food went untouched by Jason after the first few bites. He kept glancing at Adam, trying to understand who this man was, and more painfully, who he had become to Emily. A part of him had assumed she was still finding her footing, still wounded, but she wasn't. She was rooted, rebuilt, and someone else had helped her do it. After dessert, Emily stood to go. She offered Jason a kind smile, not pitying, but distant, as though she had finally drawn the line between past and present. "Thank you for dinner," she said. Adam shook Jason's hand on the way out. It was a firm grip, not threatening, not smug, just steady. As they walked out together, Adam gently placed his hand on the small of Emily's back, guiding her through the narrow space between tables. Jason sat alone for a while after they left, staring into the empty glass in front of him. He realized then, with a cold certainty, that something he'd taken for granted was gone, not misplaced, not waiting. Gone. And this time, he couldn't blame work, or timing, or misunderstanding. She had simply stopped waiting for him to see her, and someone else had. That night, Jason couldn't sleep. He lay awake in his hotel room, staring at the ceiling fan as it spun in slow, uneven circles. His mind replayed the dinner over and over, Emily's quiet confidence, the natural way she leaned into Adam's conversation, the light in her eyes that hadn't been there in years. It wasn't jealousy that twisted inside him. It was something heavier, recognition, regret, the memory of their marriage, long buried beneath work deadlines and missed birthdays, began to resurface in fragments. He remembered the night Emily made a reservation at the restaurant where they had their first anniversary. She'd put on the dress he once said made her look like sunlight. He had arrived an hour late, distracted by a client call, barely noticing her effort. He'd apologized, half-heartedly, then spent the rest of the meal checking his phone. He remembered the day Lily took her first steps, how Emily had called him, breathless with joy, begging him to come home early. He hadn't. A meeting ran long. By the time he got back, the moment had passed. Emily had filmed it, of course, but she said little as she showed him. Her excitement had already dimmed into disappointment, and he remembered the silence, the thick, aching quiet that crept in during the final year. How they would sit across from each other at dinner, chewing, swallowing, not speaking. How she used to try, asking about his day, suggesting weekend plans. But eventually even those efforts faded. She stopped asking. He barely noticed. In his mind, he had convinced himself that she had changed, that she'd withdrawn, grown cold. But now in the echo of that dinner, he saw it clearly. She hadn't changed. She'd adapted. She had been asking for him in ways she didn't always have words for, and he hadn't heard her. Jason got out of bed and walked to the window. The city stretched out beneath him, glittering and unaware. He thought of Adam again. How present he'd been, how effortlessly he fit into Emily and Lily's world. That used to be his place. Not perfect, not always easy, but his. And he gave it away, piece by piece, through absence, pride, and the assumption that she would always be there, waiting. For the first time, he allowed himself to say it, not out loud, but inwardly, honestly. I failed her. It wasn't a dramatic moment. There were no tears, no breakdown, just the steady weight of truth settling into his chest, a quiet reckoning. He had always thought time would mend what had been broken, that maybe someday they'd find their way back to each other. But time didn't heal what you ignored, and love didn't survive in silence. That night, as the first light of morning crept through the curtains, Jason understood something he hadn't before. He didn't just lose Emily. He had never truly seen her to begin with. The message came 2 days after the dinner. Jason kept it short. No flourishes, no excuses, just a simple request. Can we talk? Just the two of us. Emily paused when she read it. Part of her wanted to ignore it, to keep walking forward without looking back. But there was another part, quieter and still healing, that knew some conversations had to happen, if only to close the door gently instead of slamming it shut. They met at a quiet coffee shop tucked into a tree-lined corner of the city. It was mid-afternoon, the place nearly empty. Jason was already there when she arrived, seated by the window, turning his cup slowly in his hands like he didn't know what to do with them. When he saw her, he stood. She didn't smile. She didn't frown either. She simply nodded and sat down. There was a pause before either of them spoke. I've been thinking about you, Jason said finally, his voice low. About everything. Emily folded her hands on the table waiting. She didn't make it easier for him, and she didn't try to rescue the moment. That used to be her role, smoothing the rough edges, filling the silence. Not anymore. I was wrong, he continued, about a lot of things. I didn't see you. I didn't listen. I thought being there physically was enough. I didn't realize how far apart we were until you were gone. Emily's gaze didn't soften. Her voice was even. I tried to tell you. I know, he said. I didn't want to hear it. I thought we had time, that you'd wait. She looked out the window for a moment, watching the wind move through the trees. Then she turned back to him. I waited longer than I should have. Jason's expression cracked. For a second, he looked like the man she used to know, lost, unsure, vulnerable in a way he'd never allowed himself to be. I still love you, he said quietly. I know I don't have the right to say that, but it's true. Emily took a slow breath. Her heart didn't race. She didn't feel the ache she once imagined she would. Instead, there was a quiet calm, a kind of clarity that came only after surviving the fire. I believe you, she said, but it doesn't change anything. His eyes searched hers, as if hoping for a door to still be open somewhere. I'm with someone who shows up, she said gently, who listens, who sees not just what I do, but who I am. I didn't think I'd find that again. I wasn't even looking, but it found me. Jason nodded slowly, swallowing hard. Is it serious? Yes, she said. It is. He looked down, then back at her. Do you hate me? No, she answered. I don't. I did for a while. Or maybe I just hated how invisible I felt. But I'm past that now. I don't carry it with me anymore. There was nothing left to say after that. No dramatic goodbye, no final plea. Just the truth, settled like dust in the afternoon light. Jason stood, hesitated, then leaned forward, not to hug her but to whisper, I'm sorry. She nodded. I know. And then she watched him walk out the door, his figure fading into the street beyond. For a long time she sat at the table, unmoving. When she finally stood to leave, she felt lighter, not because it hadn't hurt, but because she no longer had to carry the weight of being unseen. It was a Sunday afternoon when it happened. Ordinary, quiet, like most weekends in their new rhythm. Emily was folding laundry in the living room, while Lily sat cross-legged on the floor, coloring with deep concentration. The sound of the video call ringing from the tablet broke the silence. Emily dried her hands and handed the device to Lily, who lit up when she saw Jason's name. "Daddy!" she beamed, answering quickly. Jason's face appeared on the screen, slightly grainy but smiling. "Hey, Bug! Missed you!" They talked about school, about her latest art project, and how she was learning to make pancakes with Adam on Saturday mornings. Jason nodded along, smiling where he could, asking questions when he remembered how. But then came the moment, unplanned, unforced, just a slip of the tongue from an honest little girl. "I showed it to Daddy." "Oh, I mean Adam," Lily said, mid-sentence, not even noticing. Jason froze. Emily from across the room paused. Lily didn't catch it. Her mind was already on to the next thing, a drawing of a fox, a new song from school. But Jason couldn't move past it. The word echoed in his ears. Daddy, not him. Adam. He tried to hide the shift in his expression, but Emily saw it. There was a flicker of pain behind his smile, a tightening in his jaw he didn't know how to disguise. He finished the call quickly after that, said he had a meeting, told Lily he loved her, promised to talk again soon. She waved, blew a kiss, and handed the tablet back to Emily without sensing a thing. Jason sat on the edge of his hotel bed long after the screen went black. He stared at the floor, hands resting on his knees, that one word playing over and over in his mind. He had always thought of Lily as constant, unchanged by distance, loyal to the memory of family. But children adapt, faster than adults and more honestly. Lily wasn't replacing him. She was simply loving the one who showed up. He didn't blame Adam. In fact, he realized painfully that if the roles were reversed, he'd hope for someone like Adam in her life. Stable, gentle, present. Still, the loss felt sharp, not loud, not angry, just hollow. Later that night, he called his sister and tried to explain how strange it felt. "She called another man Dad," he said quietly, like it was natural, like I disappeared. His sister was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You didn't disappear, Jason. You just weren't there when she needed you most, and someone else was." That night, Jason didn't scroll through photos. He didn't draft another message to Emily. He didn't drown in nostalgia or excuses. He simply sat in the quiet, confronted by the truth he could no longer ignore. Lily wasn't being cruel. She was just being honest. And Jason, for the first time, began to understand what it truly meant to be absent. Not by distance, but by choice. Jason made the appointment without telling anyone. It wasn't a dramatic decision, just a quiet moment of honesty on a sleepless morning. He found a therapist near his office, someone highly recommended, discreet, professional. The waiting room was calm, full of soft lighting and muted tones, nothing like the storm that lived inside him. When the therapist asked why he was there, Jason hesitated. Then he said simply, "I ruined my marriage and I don't fully understand why I let it happen." It was the first real truth he'd spoken out loud in months. At first, the sessions were awkward. He talked about work, about pressure, about expectations. He avoided the deeper things, skirted around emotions like they were traps. But week by week, the silence inside him began to crack. He started talking about his childhood, his father, the kind of man who showed up to dinner every night, but never once asked how anyone's day had been. A man who believed emotions were weaknesses and success was love, so long as it paid the bills. Jason realized he had inherited more than his father's jawline. He had inherited his emotional distance, his discomfort with vulnerability, his belief that providing was enough. He had become, without knowing it, the very kind of man who raised him, silent, unreachable, closed. He remembered how, in the early years of his marriage, Emily would ask him to open up. She wanted to know what scared him, what he dreamed of, what he regretted. He would shrug it off, redirect the conversation, joke his way out of anything too raw. He wasn't being cruel. He just didn't know how to be seen. But love, he now understood, requires being seen. The hardest part came when the therapist asked, "What would you have needed to change back then to save the marriage?" Jason thought about that for a long time. Courage, he finally said. To be honest, to be vulnerable, to show up when it mattered, not just when it was convenient. It was a slow process. He didn't transform overnight, but something in him began to shift. He started calling Lily more often, not with gifts or grand gestures, but with consistency. He asked her questions, listened longer. He began writing a journal, letters he never sent to Emily, where he unpacked the weight of everything he had avoided for years. He stopped romanticizing the past. He stopped blaming her silence without acknowledging what had silenced her. Instead, he began doing the one thing he had refused to do when it counted. He faced himself. One evening, weeks into therapy, he stood in front of the mirror in his apartment. He looked older, not in the way time marks a face, but in the way regret etches itself into the eyes. He didn't want her back out of guilt or nostalgia anymore. He wanted her to be happy, even if that happiness had nothing to do with him. Healing didn't mean undoing the past. It meant owning it. And for the first time in his adult life, Jason wasn't running from the man he had been. He was finally trying to become someone better. Emily had never asked Adam too many questions about his past. From the beginning, their relationship was built on the present. Simple routines, mutual respect, unspoken understanding. There was no rush to uncover everything. But one rainy evening, as they sat side by side on the couch, she turned to him and asked gently, "Have you ever been in love like this before?" Adam didn't answer right away. He looked at her for a long moment, as if weighing the cost of revisiting something buried. Then he nodded slowly. "Once," he said. "A long time ago," when he told her about a woman named Claire, how they met in college, how the relationship had been easy, almost too easy. They moved in together after graduation, bought furniture with money they didn't have, talked about the future in soft, certain tones. Claire had been the planner, Adam the dreamer. He thought they balanced each other. They were engaged for 6 months. The wedding was set for late spring, a garden ceremony with white chairs and blue flowers. But on the morning of the wedding, Adam stood alone outside the venue, tie in hand, heart pounding. Claire never arrived. No note, no call, just silence. It took days to track her down. When he finally did, she told him the truth. She had fallen out of love long before, but hadn't known how to say it. She was scared of hurting him, scared of being the villain. So she waited until the last possible moment and ran. Adam didn't speak badly of her. He didn't carry bitterness in his voice, just sadness. Not because he lost her, but because he hadn't seen the unraveling. Because he had believed they were fine, right up until they weren't. "That's why I listen so much now," he said quietly. "Why I ask questions, even the hard ones. Because silence can be a warning, and I missed it once." Emily reached for his hand. She didn't speak, but her touch said everything. She understood what it meant to be left in the silence, and to stay too long inside it. In that moment, she saw Adam differently, not as a man untouched by pain, but as someone shaped by it, someone who chose to grow rather than close off, someone who had also been on the edge of a future and watched it collapse without warning. Their love, she realized, wasn't about perfection or promises. It was about presence, about paying attention, about showing up, especially when things got uncomfortable. Emily leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the slow rise and fall of his breath. They were both marked by the past, both carrying the quiet scars of abandonment, disconnection, and disappointment. But in each other, they had found something deeper, not rescue, not escape, but recognition. And that, she thought, was the beginning of something real. Jason sat at his desk well past midnight, a single lamp casting a soft pool of light across the blank page in front of him. He had tried writing to Emily before, texts he never sent, emails that stayed in drafts, but this time was different. There was no plan to win her back, no secret hope for a second chance. Just words, just truth. The pen felt awkward in his hand. He hadn't written a real letter in years, but typing felt too cold, too easy to edit. He needed it to be real, unfiltered. He started simply. Emily, I know I'm probably the last person you want to hear from, and maybe you won't even read this. But I've spent the last few months thinking about everything. About you, about us, about the silence I used to mistake for peace. He wrote for over an hour, not just about the things he regretted, but the things he never said. He told her how he had begun to understand his own emotional absence, how he had been too afraid to be vulnerable and too proud to admit it, how he now saw the way she had tried, again and again, to reach him, and how he had met her halfway with nothing but distraction and distance. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't try to rewrite the past. He acknowledged it piece by piece and laid it bare. You asked me once, years ago, what I was afraid of. I didn't answer. The truth is, I was afraid of being fully seen. Afraid that if you saw all of me, the flaws, the uncertainty, you'd leave. I didn't understand that love doesn't disappear when we're honest. It disappears when we're not. He wrote about Lily, how proud he was of her, how grateful he was that she had stability and love, how hard it had been to hear her call another man dad, and how in the same breath he knew Adam must be someone truly good for her to feel safe enough to say it. And then, finally, I don't expect anything from this letter. I'm not asking for your heart or your trust or your time. I just needed you to know that I see it now. I see you. And I'm sorry I didn't sooner. If nothing else, I hope this gives you some peace. You gave me 10 years. I didn't always deserve them, but I'll carry them with me and with more respect than I ever showed when I had them. Jason. He folded the letter carefully and sealed it in an envelope. He didn't second-guess the words, didn't reread them. It wasn't for editing. It was for closure. A few days later, he mailed it. Weeks passed with no response. He didn't check the mailbox obsessively or wait for a message. The silence didn't crush him this time. Instead, it felt like a space he had earned, not through punishment, but through understanding. One evening, as autumn settled in, he stood on the balcony of his apartment and looked out over the city. The sky was clear, the air sharp. In his pocket was a photo of Lily that Emily had sent through the usual school update. In it, Lily was smiling wide, her arms around Adam's shoulders. Jason stared at it for a long time, then smiled. It wasn't the life he had imagined, but it was a good one. And more than that, it was hers. Emily found the letter one morning as she sorted through a week's worth of unopened mail. It was buried between bills and flyers, the envelope unassuming, her name written in Jason's familiar handwriting, slightly slanted, careful. For a moment she considered putting it aside, but something in her paused. She sat down at the kitchen table, the house still quiet, sunlight warming the floorboards. Lily was at school. Adam had just left for work. The morning was still. She opened the envelope slowly, unfolding the paper with the same care Jason had folded it. The first few lines made her heart tighten. By the third paragraph, her eyes were wet. It wasn't a plea. It wasn't filled with excuses. It was unexpectedly a confession, a quiet, honest reflection from a man who had finally found the courage to look back and really see what had happened. Not just to her, to both of them. She read it all the way through without stopping. And when she finished, she didn't feel shaken. She didn't feel anger or longing. What she felt was stillness, the kind of stillness that only comes when something heavy has been set down. Jason had once been the most important person in her life, and for years she had carried the weight of his absence, first emotionally, then physically. She had grieved their marriage silently, bit by bit, while pretending things were fine. The loneliness had wrapped itself around her so tightly she forgot what it felt like to breathe without it. But that was another life now. She wrote him back a few days later. Not a long letter, just a few lines in her steady handwriting. Jason, thank you for your letter. I read it slowly, carefully. And yes, I believe you. I forgave you a long time ago. Not because you asked, but because I needed to. Carrying that weight was never going to heal me. Letting it go did. We both made mistakes, but we both grown. I hope you find peace in that, the way I have. Be well. Emily. She mailed it that afternoon. When she walked out of the post office, the sky was overcast but bright, the kind of weather that hints at change. That evening, she told Adam about the letter. He didn't ask to read it. He didn't flinch. He just held her hand and said, "I'm glad you got the ending you needed." Emily nodded. It wasn't closure with fireworks or final goodbyes under the rain. It was something simpler. A wound, long scarred over, finally stopped aching. Jason never replied. He didn't need to. She knew he'd understand. And for the first time in years, the past no longer whispered when she closed her eyes. It was over. Gently. Finally. And that was enough. A year later, the garden smelled like jasmine in late spring. The ceremony was small, just family, close friends, and the sound of laughter blending with the breeze. Emily stood beneath an arch, wrapped in soft white blooms, her dress simple, elegant, the kind that didn't need to prove anything. Lily held her hand, wearing a flower crown she made herself, her smile wide and uncontainable. Adam stood across from her, steady and warm, his eyes filled with the quiet certainty of a man who knew what it meant to lose and love again. They didn't recite long vows. They didn't promise perfection. Instead, they spoke softly of trust, presence, and choosing one another every day, even when it wasn't easy. Emily's voice trembled only once when she said, "You saw me when I didn't know I needed to be seen." Adam didn't say anything then. He just took her hand, and that was enough. At the edge of the crowd, Jason stood. He hadn't expected an invitation, but when it arrived in the mail weeks earlier, he sat with it for hours before deciding. He didn't come to interrupt or reclaim something lost. He came to witness, to show Lily he could be part of her world, even if that world no longer revolved around him. He watched the ceremony from the back row, hands in his lap, heart steady. When Emily and Adam exchanged rings, he felt something surprising. Not pain, not jealousy, but peace. For the first time, he didn't imagine what might have been. He simply accepted what was. After the ceremony, Lily ran to him, wrapping her arms around his waist. "Did you see, Daddy?" She beamed. "Mom looked like a princess." "I did," Jason said, bending down to meet her eyes. "She looked perfect." Fonter. Emily approached a moment later, her hand still in Adam's. There was no awkwardness, no tension, just a soft, mutual nod, a recognition of what they'd shared and what they had both let go of. "Thank you for coming," she said quietly. Jason smiled. "It was a beautiful day. You deserve it." She placed a gentle hand on his arm, brief but real, then turned back to Adam, who kissed her knuckles as they walked away. Jason stayed for a little while longer, watching Lily dance barefoot on the lawn, her dress twirling in the golden light. Then he left quietly. No goodbyes, no fanfare, just a calm step forward. As he walked down the gravel path toward the parking lot, he realized something. Some stories don't end with someone coming back. They end with someone finally letting go. And on this quiet afternoon, surrounded by flowers, laughter, and the woman he once loved building a life with someone new, Jason found his ending, not the one he wanted, but the one he needed.